All right, so today we're diving into a real estate story. And this one's got some twists and turns, contracts, community development, and a whole lot of hold on what moments.
You know what I think is so interesting about this case?
What's that?
It really highlights, you know, how complex these revitalization efforts can be, how things can go wrong, even with good intentions.
Okay, so let's set the stage here. September 2018. We've got a homeowner in Baltimore's Station East neighborhood. He's firing off an email, and you could just feel the tension coming through the screen.
Mhm.
He's writing to an attorney who represents the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition. And let me tell you, he is not happy.
Yeah, an email to an attorney, that tells you right there that there's a story here. Something went wrong.
Exactly. So it turns out this homeowner bought a house in a revitalization project led by the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition. And his contract included a historic tax credit agreement. He claims he was told this agreement would make the house more affordable. But now he's changed his tune. He wants out.
Oh, so that's where things start to get interesting. See, these agreements can be really complicated, and it's so important for everyone to be on the same page, right from the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. And he goes on to say that the details were unclear, really murky at best. He met with a real estate agent who mentioned the tax credit agreement, but didn't really specify how much money he'd actually save. It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but you're missing some of the pieces.
I see. So that lack of clarity right from the get-go, that's just asking for trouble, misunderstandings. And as we see in this case, it can turn into a full-blown legal battle.
Exactly. And so the contract states that the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition advanced funds to the seller to make the property more affordable. However, the homeowner later found out that this agreement is permanent, can't get rid of it, even though he claims he could afford the house without the credit.
It sounds like he feels a little misled, like he was promised this discount but ended up paying full price.
Exactly. And guess what happens next? The attorney responds. And it's
Okay.
not a friendly letter.
Oh, so this is where things get serious.
You could say that.
Yeah.
The attorney basically lays down the law. They say, look, you signed the agreement, you countersigned the deed, you knew what you were getting into, and you have no right to keep the proceeds.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty strong stance. They're basically saying we have the documents, we're not backing down. It really highlights the importance of understanding what you're signing, especially when it comes to something as big as buying a house.
Absolutely. And to add fuel to the fire, the attorney demands that the homeowner hand over the funds immediately or face legal action. Talk about turning up the heat.
Yeah, this is where we really see the power dynamics at play. We have a homeowner possibly feeling overwhelmed and out of their depth, and then we have this organization with seemingly endless resources ready to fight.
Okay, so let me ask you this. What would you do if you were in this homeowner's shoes? I mean, talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place.
I mean, it's a tough spot, right? Do you just give in and comply, even if you feel like you were wronged? Or do you stand your ground and risk a legal battle? It's a real dilemma.
Well, hold on tight, because the story doesn't end there. A couple of months later, the homeowner hits reply and sends another email. This time, he's reaching out to someone who seems to be another attorney involved.
Oh, so it sounds like he's lawyering up, not giving up without a fight.
Exactly. He acknowledges a request for mediation and says he's open to it.
Hmm.
But here's where it gets really interesting. He mentions that he's seeking help from not one, but two national organizations.
Okay, now that's interesting. Why bring national organizations into what seems like a local real estate dispute?
That's the million-dollar question. It seems like he believes there's something bigger going on here, possibly discriminatory practices. But before we jump to conclusions, let's back up for a second and make sure everyone's on the same page here. What are historic tax credits, and how do they work? Understanding that is crucial to unpacking this whole situation.
Yeah, you're right. So think of a historic tax credit as a reward for developers who breathe new life into historic buildings. It's a dollar-for-dollar federal income tax credit, which means they can save a lot of money on their taxes by renovating these properties. It's a win-win, preserving history, encouraging investment in these often overlooked neighborhoods.
Okay, that makes sense. But knowing what we know about this situation, how do these tax credits play into the agreement with the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition?
Well, there are a few ways to structure these agreements, but typically the organization leading the project, they'll assign the right to claim that tax credit to a buyer or investor, kind of like handing over a winning lottery ticket. And in return, they might get an upfront payment or offer a discount on the purchase price, helps them offset those renovation costs. It's a clever way to make these projects financially possible.
Okay, I see. So given all of that, what are some arguments each side could make? Let's put on our legal thinking caps for a minute.
Okay, so on the homeowner side, you can bet he's going to argue that the tax credit agreement was misleading, especially for a first-time homebuyer, someone who's not familiar with all the financial jargon.
Right.
He might claim that the real estate agent or the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition didn't properly explain all the fine print, leading him to believe he was getting a much bigger break than he actually was.
And what about the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition? What's their likely defense?
They're probably going to point right to the contract and say, hey, it's all there in black and white, the homeowner signed it. They might emphasize that he had every opportunity to review the terms, maybe even consult with an attorney before signing. Their position is likely to be that they held up their end of the bargain by completing those renovations. And now the homeowner is legally obligated to hand over those tax credit proceeds.
So it sounds like a classic he said, she said situation. But with these national organizations stepping in, things are about to get even more complicated. What are the legal implications of that? What kind of claims could they potentially bring to the table?
Well, that's what we'll be exploring in part 2 of this deep dive. Stay with us. Things are about to get interesting.
Welcome back to our deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about those national organizations joining the homeowner's side. What could that mean for the case?
Yeah, it's like he's bringing in the heavy hitters.
Yeah.
It definitely suggests that this isn't just a simple contract dispute anymore. We could be looking at some serious allegations here, unfair practices, or even discrimination. And that throws a whole new wrench into things.
Absolutely. So that brings us to a really important question. What kind of arguments could the homeowner potentially make with these powerful allies backing him up? Well, I'm thinking he could argue that the tax credit agreement was presented in a way that was intentionally misleading. Especially for someone buying a house for the first time. Someone who might not be as familiar with all the financial lingo.
That's a strong possibility. He might claim that the real estate agent or the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition deliberately glossed over those terms, making him think he was getting a way better deal than he actually was.
And he could also argue that the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition was targeting certain communities, certain demographics with these agreements, maybe preying on a lack of financial knowledge, lack of access to legal representation.
That's another angle worth considering. If the homeowner can show a pattern of these agreements being disproportionately offered in specific neighborhoods or to certain groups of people, that could raise some serious red flags, potential discriminatory practices.
It's almost like they were dangling this promise of affordable housing as a way to snag those valuable tax credits,
Yeah.
potentially profiting off the very communities they claim to be helping.
That's a pretty serious accusation, but it's certainly a possibility that needs to be examined. And if he can back up these claims with solid evidence, it could really strengthen his case.
This whole situation really shines a light on the potential pitfalls of these tax credit agreements, especially when there's a power imbalance between the people involved.
Oh, for sure. It really emphasizes the need for transparency, clear communication from the start. Home buyers need to understand exactly what they're signing, the immediate consequences, the long-term financial implications, all of it.
And on the flip side, the historic East Baltimore Community Action Coalition and organizations like it, they have to be mindful of their ethical obligations. Their mission is to serve the community, not exploit loopholes for their own financial gain.
It's a tough balancing act, right? These tax credit programs can be powerful tools for revitalizing neighborhoods, creating more affordable housing options, but they need to be implemented fairly, ethically, with the community's best interests at heart.
Speaking of the community, let's think about the ripple effects of this dispute for a moment. How might this case impact future homebuyers in similar revitalization projects? Not just here, but across the country.
That's the big question, isn't it? If the homeowner wins this case, if he successfully challenges that tax credit agreement or proves discrimination, well, that could set a precedent for other cases nationwide.
It could lead to more scrutiny of these agreements, how they're being used. We might even see stricter regulations, more oversight to ensure fairness and transparency for everyone involved.
And it could empower other homebuyers who feel like they've been taken advantage of, misled. They might be more likely to come forward, seek legal action.
This case could spark a much-needed conversation about the ethics of affordable housing initiatives. the role of community development organizations in these projects.
Absolutely. It raises important questions about potential conflicts of interest. When organizations dedicated to serving the community also have a financial stake in these projects.
This whole situation, it's like a tangled web. Legal complexities, ethical dilemmas, potential societal impacts. It reminds us that even those seemingly straightforward real estate transactions can have far-reaching consequences, ones that go way beyond the individuals involved.
And it emphasizes the importance of asking questions, getting legal advice when you need it, being your own advocate as a homeowner.
We've covered a lot of ground, but here's a question I want to leave our listeners with. Imagine you're a homeowner in a similar revitalization project, and you're presented with a tax credit agreement that seems like a dream come true, promising to make that dream home more affordable. What steps would you take to protect yourself, to make sure you really understand the terms of that agreement?
That's a great question to think about, and we'll explore some potential answers in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into this real estate dispute. We're talking about those steps you could take to protect yourself. If you were faced with a tax credit agreement.
Right, because at the end of the day, knowledge is power, especially when you're dealing with legal and financial stuff that can have those long-term consequences.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there. The first thing is don't be afraid to ask questions. If something doesn't make sense or seems a little too good to be true, that's when you gotta dig a little deeper. Don't let anyone pressure you into signing anything that you don't fully understand.
Yeah, it's so important to remember that it's your signature on that document. You need to be 100% comfortable with what you're agreeing to.
Exactly. And another smart move, get yourself a lawyer, have an attorney look over that agreement, explain everything in plain English. They can advise you on your rights, your options if things go south later on.
It's like having a legal translator, right? Making sure you don't accidentally sign away your rights.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to negotiate either. These agreements aren't always set in stone. You might be able to get better terms or even walk away from the deal entirely if you're not happy.
Right. Buying a house is a huge decision, probably one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make. You have the right to protect your interests, make informed choices.
And this case also shows how important it is to do your research. Before you even think about buying a house in a revitalization project, look into the community development organization involved, their track record, their financial practices, any past issues or controversies.
Yeah, it's kind of like reading those online reviews before you buy something, right?
Yeah.
You want to know if the organization has a good reputation. Are they fair? Are they transparent?
Transparency is so important, and if you see any red flags, or feel pressured into signing something that just doesn't feel right, don't be afraid to walk away. There are other houses, other opportunities out there. Don't settle for something that feels off.
So to wrap things up, our deep dive into this real estate dispute has uncovered some valuable lessons for anyone thinking about similar transactions. Open communication, thorough research, independent legal advice, and the willingness to negotiate those are your best tools when it comes to protecting yourself.
It's a good reminder that these transactions, they go beyond just buying a house. They touch on so many other things: community development, affordable housing, ethical considerations that have a ripple effect on everyone involved.
We encourage you to keep those bigger issues in mind as you navigate the world of real estate, and consider how your choices impact your community.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more you know, the better prepared you'll be to make smart decisions and stand up for your rights.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive, folks. We hope you found this journey insightful and thought-provoking. Until next time, stay curious.